Welcome to Young Earth Anonymous, a 12-step program where we allow Scripture to cure Christians of young Earth creationism. Today we're going to ask our second question from Genesis 1, verses 3 through 5. And the second question is, what was created on day 1? If you recall last last video, we talked about Genesis 1, 1 and 2, where we talked about what occurred prior to these 6 creative days. The fact that God created everything, the heavens and the earth, and everything in between before day 1 started, and how the shape of it was formless and was empty. And what does that mean? We looked at other ways it's used in the Old Testament. How it's something that's chaotic, it's unwelcoming, it's inhospitable, lacks meaning, doesn't have purpose. And that fits our description here, because water is sometimes used in the Old Testament as imagery of something that's chaos, like the land. The water is, the sea is something that's kind of outside of an ancient person's view. Is the sea would be something that's outside of God's realm, the things that aren't managed, the things that aren't controlled. And we see here that idea fits, because the Spirit of God is hovering over the face of the deep. But you'll notice there is the deep, and the earth does already exist, and so do the other elements of creation. And that as a young earth creationist is a different kind of idea. So let's take a look at what happens in verse 3. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So that's the answer to the question, right? What did God create on day 1? He created light. But now if you insist on a scientific meaning, if you insist on a scientific explanation of this, what does that mean actually? Does that mean God created light particles? Are they in transit light particles? Because we know what light is. I've heard all sorts of crazy explanations that apologists have talked about, how the light is referring to the cosmic background radiation when the universe was created. That is light that was created. Now surely that is light that was created, but however it was already created in verse 1. And I don't think Moses was really into cosmic background radiation. And on that note, there's a very dangerous hermeneutic involved in trying to draw scientific meaning out of the Old Testament. So when you think that your view of biblical inspiration is that God is bypassing the author, he's bypassing Moses, he's bypassing the original audience, he's bypassing all the Christians for 1900 years who didn't know about the Big Bang or cosmic background radiation, not that they do, including myself, know now, but God is bypassing all of those people so that he can deliver the meaning to you. And so it's meaningless to everyone before this, and it only has scientific meaning as of 100 years ago. And then on top of that, when we find out our science now is wrong, it loses its meaning. That's a very dangerous hermeneutic. God is not reciting. It's a very dangerous view of inspiration. God is not reciting to Moses. He's talking to him through things that he understands, that his personality, his experiences, and things that the audience can understand. He's not talking about cosmic background radiation. Another example comes from Answers in Genesis here. You can see Ken Hamm thinks that there must have been another light source. So I guess the light particles weren't just created in transit or just sitting without a source. Ken Hamm believes that there must have been some other temporary local light source. So this kind of special pleading is where you end up. So the sun doesn't exist yet, but light exists. Where's the light coming? It's coming from some other light source that is not named, and then apparently was decommissioned in 3 days for no one to know that it ever existed or why it existed, and then it just got disappeared, and then God told Moses about that particular light source. Of course, it's certainly unscientific. It's certainly not biblical. It's a made-up special pleading because, oh no, we've got all this light. We got to come up with a light source. We don't have a sun yet. That's the kind of thing we want to avoid. And it's also, the Bible tells us on verse 4, and if you're reading it the way he's reading it, that's when all the other heavenly stars and other heavenly bodies are created. So to just kind of drum one up because you have the unfortunate problem of having some extra light to deal with is kind of silly. So those are some of the things that God did not create. It's also safe to say that while, and this is something I like about young earth creationists, right, is they botched the science, but when they're done with the botched science, it's what they're trying to do is they're trying to make God the source of everything without the understanding that God can be the source of everything. He's always the primary source, even when there's secondary sources. So what that I like that young earth creation is because when we're done, and if we could just drop the silliness, we'd end up with the same conclusion, that God is light. God is the primary source. It's the contrast of the darkness in verse 2 with the light that's now being created in verse 3. God is the source of life. The God is the source of the light. However, if you're going to insist on a scientific meaning and say that we're talking about light particles as we understand them, to say that those are God is kind of a pantheistic idea that God, part of creation, God is in creation in a physical sense, that God doesn't need to create his own being. If God is a light, God is a light. So theologically, I'm right with you. That's a great explanation. I think that's more of the final explanation if you can just skip all the goofiness prior to that. It is safe to say that God is the source of light, but you can't say that God physically is the light. That would be kind of an error in a kind of sense of pantheism, that God is inside of creation or a part of creation. What's happening here is there's a polemic. The sun is being deprioritized because it's a polemic against those who would worship the sun. The light is coming from God. The sun isn't the star here. And so those are things. What did God? Those are some things we want to keep in mind there. That God is the source of the light for sure. God can't be the light himself in a physical, scientific sense, and that there's a polemic against worshiping the sun. That's why the sun is not mentioned. The sun is part of the filling, right? The issue with it's shapeless and empty. The first 3 days are going to work on the shape. The next 3 days are going to work on the filling. This is part of the shape. So how is light part of the shape? Because that's why this is an important question. What is it that God created on day one? The answer isn't really light. And he goes on to say, God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Right? So that now he's not just taking light, he's separating light from darkness. He called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So there's a period of light called day. That's the simple meaning, the direct meaning, the most obvious meaning. What is the period of light to a modern person, to an ancient person, to everyone in between? What is the source of the light for a period of light that you call day? The source is the sun. God is creating here, not light particles. That's not the focus that we're talking about. That's not the intent of the text. What's being created here is a time for God to govern man's affairs. He's forming day and night. Man is going to be awake during the day. He's going to work. He's going to do his thing. And there's going to be a schedule. There's timekeeping involved. And then he's going to go to bed at night. And then the same thing is going to be happening again. So the question is this the very first day that the sun came up? And the answer, in a spiritual sense, in a theological sense, in an important sense, I would say, is yes, this is the very first day. This is the day that God is declaring time. God is declaring that there is light and there's day to govern the affairs of men. So what about the day prior? What was that? That was the day when things were still purposeless, meaningless. And I'm going to give you some analogies that I think make you, because this is probably a different kind of way of thinking of it if you're a young earth creationist. So I have a couple analogies here. So what does it mean to create something, to start something? Right? If I tell you I'm going to create a business, when is day one? Is day one the day that I start building the bricks or digging the basement or putting a roof on? Or is day one the day that I hire workers to build the building? Or is day one the time that I order supplies? All those things, that you have to do in order to get to your opening, the day that you have a pizzeria, the first day that you're serving pizza for customers. That's the day that you started your business. You got your first dollar, you framed it. Everything existed prior to that. That's the kind of thing. We're starting a program. We created a business. You are a scientist you're plagued by scientism, so you're assuming, no, if it's important, it has to talk about the scientific, physical little particles that were made. An ancient person isn't like that. And we're not like that, just in the example that I gave. There's ways that we don't think like that. If I get another example, how about a play? You've been working on your play for 6 months. All the actors know all their lines. All the props are done. The stage is there, but there's no customers. But there's no audience. But you practice every day. Everybody knows their lines. You run through it all the time until finally it's opening night or opening day in this case, and you pull the curtains, and that is your first day.
What's going on there? Reroute it back through.
We need more light. We'll never find him this way.
Yeah.
What time is it?
It's way too early for that.
Open it up.
Cue the sun.
What time is it?
Of the play. That's the first day we're talking about. We're not concerned about where the sun's at and where it's hiding for days and where the light particles are coming from and what cosmic background radiation. That's scientific thoughts for scientific people, and this is not what the text is about. If you start a school, you're not concerned about, well, where did you get your bricks? Where did you get the roof? Where did you do this? If you start a school, say, what kind of class are you teaching? What is the program? What's the agenda? That's what's happening here. The agenda is God is creating a period of light called day to govern, to manage time for the affairs of men. So where's the sun? Sun's in the sky, just like it is. What was actually physically created on day one? Nothing. Everything was there prior to that. What was created in the sense that opening night, first day of business, the day that the classes started for a school, everything. God is declaring the purpose of light, declaring how he's going to govern the universe. And the management of time. And then the day ends with there's evening and there was morning, the first day. So the question that people often assume, if I'm not a young earth creationist, they'll fight about the days being literal. I personally believe the days are literal. I think periods of time doesn't fit the way the days are arranged. I have no problem with saying Genesis 3, God declared this. The first day of creation is put to meaning and purpose. Day, the sun and the rotation of the earth, those things were put to work and provided meaning 6,000, 10,000 years ago. If you can derive from the Bible, there's no reason that couldn't happen 6,000 years ago. There's nothing scientific about it, that it doesn't conflict, because I have other reasons in verses 1 and 2. I don't see any biblical reason to think that verses 1 and 2 happened 6,000 years ago. I don't have any biblical reason to think they didn't. There's scientific reason to people that people believe that happens 13 billion years ago. So 13 billion years ago verses 1 and 2, we get to verse 3, 6,000 years ago. We're starting the program. We're open for business. It's our first day. It's opening night at a play, however you want to put it. Some people might say, well, why would it have to take billions of years? And that's someone who's finite, wondering why God wasn't more efficient. God didn't have to be efficient. There's no need for God to need to condense his work into anything less than 13 billion years. That has no meaning how long something takes or doesn't take. So in conclusion, everything existed before day one, but now day one we're opening for business. We have 6 days to get everything done so we can start day 7. So the literal meaning of a period of light is the time in which the sun shines. If I tell you God created day, the very simple meaning, the meaning that makes most sense, is God created the period that we know as day, that ancient people knew as day, governed by the sun, daytime, nighttime, daytime, nighttime. There's no reason to need to invent other unnamed forms of light. There's no reason to conjure up particles in transit and try to get Moses to be a super, like Stephen Hawking's cosmologist. We can simply use the simple meaning that God created a period called day and a period called night.